Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Be Bold America. I'm your host, Jill Cody, along with my co-host, Dr. Pettis Perry. Hey, Pettis, did I hear you got a new puppy? Uh-oh, I think we have a problem with Pettis's line. Well, then I'll just start with Emily is looking very confused, our show engineer here. So I'm going to just start the program. Our program today is The Post Office is Under Attack. Why does Louis DeJoy want to destroy it? This is not what Ben Franklin had in mind. First-class mail rates were hiked and yet is now moving more slowly than the 1970s. Trump-appointed postmaster Louis DeJoy has different plans for the postal system than we the people expect of our constitutionally empowered U.S. Postal Service. What are they and why? In addition, the Democratic Governors Association stated that Louis DeJoy is a danger to the public and a threat to democracy. We must all join the fight against this threat. Our future depends on it. Porter, are you there?
I am. Hi, Jill.
Oh, good. I don't know if we have Pettis back now. We do? Okay. So, Pettis, are you on with me now?
I am. I don't know what was going on. It was showing that I was ready on my end.
Well, I just got a little note from Emily saying a previous board engineer left Spotify on. So, this is live radio.
How are you doing, Porter?
Hi, Pettis. It's great to meet you.
It's great to meet you as well. Thank you for joining us today.
And I did want to ask you, did I hear you got a new puppy?
I did. His name is Chance, or Chase, I should say.
Oh, Jesus.
I'm so confused today. No, he's a great little
Chase.
puppy. Chase, I got him a week ago, and he's a great little pup. I've been trying to figure out what to call him. So
right.
Hence the confusion.
That's confusion. Well, I read the introduction to the programs while we were figuring out what was going on there. So, Pettis, do you want to introduce our guest?
Sure. Porter McConnell is the co-founder of Save the Post Office Coalition, and she is the campaign director for Take on Wall Street. She previously ran the Financial Transparency Coalition, a global network of civil society, governments, and experts working to stop illicit financial flows out of developing countries. Porter has...
Oh, my. Did we lose Pettis?
Oh, dear. I can't hear him either.
I can't either. Well, let me... So, Porter has a master's in public policy from University of Michigan and a BA from Williams College. She has contributed policy analysis to media outlets, including Vox, National Public Radio, Market Watch, The Guardian, American Banker, Reuters, Alternet, Daily Nation Kenya, EU Observer, and Fusion TV, just to name a few. So thank you for hanging in there, Porter. We are delighted to have you. Before we begin talking about the intentional destruction of the post office by its very own Postmaster General, some good news happened this past Friday. Why don't you share with us what happened? It's a ray of hope, right?
That's right. It was a champagne glass clinking emoji kind of day for the coalition. We have been spending a lot more time than we'd like in our efforts to save the post office, focusing on one, Ron Bloom, who is the outgoing chair of the Postal Board of Governors. The Postal Board of Governors has a lot of power. They are the ones who can hire and fire the Postmaster General. And Ron Bloom, from the start, has set himself up as a real strong DeJoy ally, said he co-wrote the 10-year plan with DeJoy, says he was tickled pink with DeJoy's performance in the middle of the worst slowdowns last summer, if you can believe it. Very much personally identified with the DeJoy project at the Postal Service. And we had been hearing that there was a possible intention for the White House to renominate Ron Bloom. And so we had sort of pulled out all the stops trying to make sure that doesn't happen. That it beggars belief that would have happened. And it sounds like they heard us, because on Friday they made the announcement in the morning that Ron Bloom was going to be thanked for his service and sent on his way. And then later in the afternoon, they made an announcement of 2 nominees to the Postal Board to replace Mr. Bloom and John Barger, whose term would be up in December.
So does Mr. Bloom's term end in December so that the new people would start till January? What's the timing on?
Well, so his term ended last December, and he has been in a holdover year. So if they don't nominate someone, you get an extra year on the clock. And so he was actually a year past a 7-year term, and they were still trying to think about maybe they would renominate him. It's just really amazing. So what happens now? I believe, though I could be proven wrong here, it's never a good idea to bet for Congress getting things done expeditiously, but it looks like his term will expire before the new folks are up for their hearing and their confirmation.
So then it would just be a few people until they're confirmed?
Yeah, and there was a chunk of years where the board was half empty during the Obama administration, so that is not unprecedented. It's not a good place to be in, but an empty seat or a seat with Ron Bloom in it, my preferences are quite clear.
Ours too. I think Pettis is back. Pettis, you have a question?
I do, as long as the gremlins don't keep popping up today.
The live radio gremlins again.
Yes, indeedy. Can you tell us a little bit about the process for bringing in a postmaster general and how to go about removing him or her if that becomes the case? And then a little bit about DeJoy's bona fides for being postmaster general in the first place.
Yeah. I get this question a lot from activists who want to know why President Biden didn't just fire Louis DeJoy, on day one, or certainly within the 100-day window. The Postmaster General is hired and fired by the Postal Board. It's an independent agency. There are several of these. So it's not within the President's power to directly appoint or hire or fire a Postmaster General. However, the President is in charge of naming governors to the board, and so that board, in turn, can make those decisions. And so what typically happens, because it's really a very rare thing that the agency has been politicized to this degree, almost all of the previous postmasters general were career civil servants who knew more about the Postal Service than I will ever know, and who were chosen, for moving up in the ranks of the USPS. Louis DeJoy came in a highly irregular process. Basically, Stephen Mnuchin kind of, there was a whole recruitment firm that did the typical executive search, also vetted candidates, and that's important. DeJoy came in after that process. I believe he was a recommendation of Robert Duncan, one of the board members, but basically Stephen Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary at the time, kind of stuck his name in there. He's a huge Trump donor and a general sort of Republican mega donor, and so everyone knew his name. And basically, he never got vetted. He didn't go through the recruitment firm. He wasn't in with the other names, and it was so irregular as to cause the deputy postmaster general and the vice chair of the postal board to resign in protest.
Because he didn't even get a background check, right?
He didn't get a background check. There were meetings that were held that they were not invited to as members of the board. It was all incredibly shady. And his background check would have been quite fruitful, as we've learned in the preceding year and a half. There's a lot there. His logistics firm ran, literal sweatshops. They wouldn't run the AC in their warehouses in order to save money. And so there's a whole lot of labor complaints, a whole lot of, straw donor schemes, getting his executives to give money to the Republican Party to candidates and then reimbursing them in the form of bonuses, a whole bunch of terrible stuff, even cheating the USPS in a contract where there was litigation. So anyway, the American public didn't find any of that out. There was no search. There was just here, Louis DeJoy is the new Postmaster General.
Pettis?
That's amazing. But it's not surprising in light of the entire Trump agenda.
It's hard to know where to place that in the pantheon of Trump administration sins, but it was bad.
It's terrible. I mean, he's really done what I think he set out to do, and what most of them were trying to do, which was to really disrupt our governing mechanisms, and if not, tear them down. So, they talked about that openly. So I was looking in preparation for this show and came across DeJoy's 10-year plan. Can you talk a little bit about that? Was that vetted and approved by the board, or was that just basically pushed through? Are there any positive characteristics, or what problems do you see? And what's the end game that DeJoy is trying to create? What are the outcomes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the 10-year plan very much had the approval of the board. The board, keeping in mind that because there were so many empty seats previously, the members of the board were all Trump appointed. The Obama administration hadn't filled the seats that it had to fill, so those were sitting empty. They were very supportive of this 10-year plan, and in the case of Ron Bloom, the outgoing chair, he sort of co-drafted it with Louis DeJoy. And the main components, there's a lot in there, and there's some stuff that postal leadership put in there to keep the unions quiet that is legitimately good. So some stuff about moving some workers from sort of non-tenured status to more of a career employment trajectory, and that was one of the things that really, that really was viewed very positively. Unions. The overall scheme of the 10-year is raise prices, slow service, and sort of start to outsource key functions like sorting and distribution and all the trucks, that kind of thing. So basically, it's kind of to degrade the product, make the product slower, more expensive, and then figure out a way to get more contracts for the private sector into the mix of, who's doing the core functions of the Postal Service. So that's kind of the 10-year plan's overall idea.
And maybe make it ripe for complete privatization. One of the formulas is to drive a program into the ground and then and get the public very frustrated with it, and then come in and say, business can do it better. Yet they want to make a profit, yet they won't deliver to rural areas.
The words right out of my mouth.
Okay, go ahead.
Absolutely right. It's we've been tracking this. Pew does a poll every year of what's your favorite government agency, and USPS is always at the top. So one of the things they need to do is make it less popular. Obviously, that has happened over the course of the last year. We've seen some dropping in those sort of favorability numbers, which are typically in the 91% was the last one before DeJoy, which you don't get anywhere. It's by far the most popular government agency. And then, just as you say, you subcontract out this function or that function, and then eventually that all adds up, and you say, well, it's practically privatized anyway. Think about all the private capital we can have access to if we make this transformation complete. Of course, they only need that capital because they've been starving it of capital the whole time. And then people are so disenchanted that they just don't fight it. It's kind of a war of attrition for them.
Well, this is time for a good break. Good time for a break. You're listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7 FM. Many voices, one station. Listen globally online from the ksqd.org website. We're speaking with Porter McConnell, co-founder of the Save the Post Office Coalition. And she's also the campaign director for Take on Wall Street. Visit takeonwallstreet.com for more information. I'm your host, Jill Cody.
Hello, K-Squid listeners. I'm Tom Hartman, and each weekday at 4 p.m., I bring you a different perspective on the news than you're likely to hear on most media outlets. Please join me on KSQD Santa Cruz, your ink spot on the dial for the Tom Hartman program, heard now for the first time ever in the Monterey Bay area at 90.7 FM, weekdays at 4 p.m. That's Progressive Talking Conversation with me, Tom Hartman, weekdays at 4 p.m. on KSQD 90.7 FM. Tag, you're it.
Today, our topic is The Post Office is Under Attack. Why does Louis DeJoy want to destroy it? We're speaking with Porter McConnell, co-founder of the Save the Post Office Coalition and the campaign director for Take on Wall Street. You can also follow Porter on Twitter at Porter McConnell. Now, Porter, we were talking about it being privatized, and yet the post office is in our U.S. Constitution as a service. So It seems to me that it's constitutionally empowered. How would that get privatized?
Yeah, and I think that, again, it's a bit of one of those, like, wars of attrition, so that there's a universal service obligation that means that everyone in America is required, it's the Postal Service is required to serve everyone in America, no matter where they live. So if they live in rural Alaska, if they live in the middle of Manhattan, doesn't matter. They get the right to have the USPS serve them. Ways that you can make that functionally less true is, for instance, there is a the Postal Service is required to break even and doesn't get money in the federal budget, sort of sent to it. So it's self-supporting, let's say. The one exception to that is the Alaska Bypass Program, which is a multi-million-dollar, I think it's around $200 million or maybe $350 million dollars a year, that allows it to reach very out-of-the-way areas of Alaska. Louis DeJoy was suggesting removing that program. And so one of the things that it does is, it provides airmail in places where there aren't functioning roads for a big chunk of the year. It also, some of that airmail is groceries because we're talking about areas that are that remote. We certainly know that the level of service has degraded so much in the last year, and especially in Black and brown communities, especially in Detroit, especially in Baltimore. It's really, you can look at that map, especially in California, actually, especially in the 10-year plan. California's going to take a real hit. You could make the case that while there is still technically on paper the universal service obligation, there are a lot of folks for whom it hasn't served. And I would say, on reservations, my understanding is that the mail has been delivered poorly for a long time, and this predates DeJoy, that there's a lot of sort of unevenness of service, but none of that even remotely compares to the hacksaw that Louis DeJoy took to the universal service obligation when he came on last year. But all this to say that, it's like all things in this country, the resources are not distributed evenly, unfortunately.
Well, taking a hacksaw is something that I believe the Republican Party has done for decades. I'm remembering that there was a plan to sabotage the post office with requiring them to come up with the money. 75-year requirement, was it, to fund benefits for employees that hadn't even been born yet?
That's right. So the retiree health benefits of postal workers who are decades from being a gleam in their parents' eyes are required to be set aside, and every year that's something like $5 billion, $6 billion, something like that, dollars that they have to put aside. There's no other government agency that does that. There's no private sector company that does that. It's completely unheard of, and it's a really clever way to make the Postal Service look like it's broke. And in fact, there's legislation right now in Congress, the Postal Service Reform Act, that would eliminate that mandate.
Oh, good.
Which is great. And it's so outrageous as to have even bipartisan support in this day and age. So it is extremely unpopular. This kind of came in place in a reorganization in 2006.
Well, it was also a lame duck session between Bush and Obama, I believe, that they enacted it when they still had control of Congress. So they slipped that in right at the end, and now it's 2021. And I would think that $5 billion a year they've got to set aside for people that haven't even been born yet may affect the service in those rural areas or the indigenous people areas, and because they had to put it over to this. So it's a very clear tactic in my mind of the Republican Party wanting to destroy the service so it could be ultimately privatized. And then Louis DeJoy was a perfect a tool for that. Pettis, do you have a question?
That's right.
Certainly do. I'd like to talk a little bit about attrition, which is what I did my dissertation on, and I actually founded a company to try to reverse that. The just tremendous loss of what we call in the trade human capital. It's a terrible word. But I saw that there was some 40% attrition rates, and I was wondering how much of that has come as a result of the way that DeJoy has been leading the organization.
That's a great question. I mean, it's. I would say that COVID has definitely played a role. It has made it so that, there's a period last Christmas where I think 18,000 postal workers were either quarantining or had COVID themselves during the middle of the holiday rush. And so what that means for everybody who is working is they're working 20-hour days. And, Louis DeJoy didn't properly staff up for that, didn't foresee it in a way that, all of the private carriers did, and anybody watching from their living rooms did not properly account for that. And so we can certainly blame him for poor management of that moment. But it's also true that when you outsource a lot of functions that used to be core functions, when you work 12-hour shifts instead of previously working 8 hours. We work with a lot of postal retirees, and they tell the story. It used to be a job where you could get proper rest, and you could make a living wage, and you could support a family, and it's just not the case anymore. And I wouldn't pin 100% of that on Louis DeJoy. Congress has certainly played a role over the years, but it is certainly a bit of a diseased organization at this point, and there's what they've said about this holiday season is that they're going to try to hire about 40,000 workers who are seasonal. But what's happening is that a great number of them are quitting after a day or two because it's just such backbreaking work, especially when you are, doing longer shifts and required to fill in for folks, and they didn't hire enough people in the first place. So, you need more seasonal workers if you don't have a big enough postal workforce, And they've been trying to hire, so they say, but they're hiring with the presumption of all of these things. The workplace is not what it was, from what I heard from a lot of sort of retirees. And I would say that they're doing a lot of things like reclassifying the newer postal workers as, non-union, or there's a lot of and guess who are the newer, younger postal workers? They tend to be more likely to be Black or Latino, or so it's basically like there's a lot of those were good jobs when the job there were more white folks in those jobs, and now they're sort of starting to have this two-tiered situation, and so it's there's a whole lot of factors going on at the same time, and especially because even in spite of that, the post office has been historically a pathway to the Black middle class, and so it's seeing that be eroded in this way is incredibly threatening. That's why we have so many civil rights groups in the coalition, because it's just it feels like a lingering insult from the Trump administration.
It's amazing. Jill, you mind if I ask another one?
We have a minute to the break.
Well, why don't we move towards the break if we've just got a minute?
Okay.
And I can ask it after.
All righty. Also, just to let you know, Porter, at the break that's coming up, we're going to have a Jim Hightower commentary that's called Your Dog Knows Better, but it's about the post office. So
great.
Just want to give you a heads up. You're listening to our guest, Porter McConnell, co-founder of the Save the Post Office Coalition, and who also is the campaign director for Take on Wall Street. Visit takeonwallstreet.com for more information, and you may follow her on Twitter at Porter McConnell. In addition, if you'd like to be added to our news group, you may text Be Bold America to 22828. Text Be Bold America to 22828. I'm your host, Jill Cody.
When Donald Trump declared he would fix the U.S. Postal Service, he was using the word fix the same way veterinarians do when you bring in your dog. Trump wasted an inordinate amount of his presidential power and prestige in a failed attempt to neuter an agency that literally delivers for the people. Extraordinary postal workers move our letters and packages by truck, car, airplane, boat, motorbike, mule, and of course by foot, to any address across town or across the country. Both essential and effective, it's the most popular federal agency, with 91% of the public approving its work. Thus, an uproar of protest killed Trump's attempt to gut it. When it comes to bad public policy, however, failure is just a way of saying, let's try the back door. Trump was defeated, but he left behind an undistinguished postmaster general named Louis DeJoy, who had only 2 qualifications for the job. He was a Trump mega donor, and he was a peer of corporate powers that have long wanted to privatize the Postal Service. In March, before the new Biden presidency had taken charge of the postal system, DeJoy popped through the back door with his own 10-year plan to fix the agency. Rhetorically, his plan promised to, quote, achieve service excellence by making mail delivery more consistent and reliable. How? By consistently cutting service and reliably gouging customers. Specifically, DeJoy proposed to close numerous mail processing facilities, eliminate jobs, reduce post office hours of service, and cut the standard of delivering our first-class mail from 3 days to 5. Oh, also raise stamp prices. This is Jim Hightower saying delivering lousy service at higher prices is intended to destroy public support, opening up the service to take over by private profiteers. And who gets joy from that? The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by the Lowdown Happy Hour, live streamed from the Chat and Chew Cafe. Details at hightowerlowdown.org.
If you're just joining us, I'm your host, Jill Cody, along with my co-host, Dr. Pettis Perry. You're listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7 FM. Many voices, one station. Listen globally online from the ksqd.org website. You're listening to our guest, Porter McConnell, co-founder of the Save the Post Office Coalition, and who also is the campaign director for Take on Wall Street. Visit takeonwallstreet.com for more information. Now, Porter, I have a question about Fox News.
Oh, dear.
Well,
let me sip my tea.
I just have said many times that I don't know how we're going to save our democracy or our post office without dealing with Fox News. Every other network, including MSNBC, has a standards and practices department. They have ethics department. Fox News has none of those. And so nobody really within the organization watches what people say and do and what their motives are. So what has been Fox News' role with the post office?
I mean, I think they, as always, and as Mr. Hightower has put it, have always sold the narrative that government is a basket case and, carried that mantle that, the private sector can do it better, despite many folks' direct experience with the private sector to the contrary. But I think that they have pushed that narrative and done a really good job. And to be honest, they didn't invent that narrative. That narrative is very much a sort of, product of the Reagan years and is not, it's not new on the scene. But they sort of, I think they maybe divorced it from the sort of quasi studies that you could cite some numbers and just started saying, crazy stuff. So I think that's, they maybe sort of unhinged it a little bit from the, hire yourself a think tank to say the thing that you would like them to say, practice that the old line Republicans used to do. And I'll be honest, I don't find that any more noble necessarily. I mean, it's harder to track, but it's, it still gets the job done. They've sort of said, hey, we don't have to do that anymore. We can just say whatever we want. And, because there's been this erosion of trust in the media, that they have obviously fostered but also benefited from, they don't have to source what they say anymore. And so I think, far be it from me, there are much smarter minds thinking about how to put how to close Pandora's box again on misinformation. But to me, the answer lies through Facebook certainly and other social media platforms for sure. But I am no purveyor of great wisdom there. All I know is that when you start talking about government being the problem, then all of your solutions look like a dystopian world where you only get service if you're rich and white, and that, and male, and that is that's not a country I want to live in.
Right, me either. Pettis?
Yeah, thank you. You started talking about your coalition. I'd like to get into that a little bit more. Can you talk a little bit about Take on Wall Street, your membership, and why Take on Wall Street has taken on the U.S. Postal Service through the Save the Post Office Coalition?
We at Take on Wall Street have been working on building alternatives to the financial industry as it is right now. So the predatory lenders, the big banks, the foreclosures during the financial crisis, all of the terrible things. We have been focused on alternatives and moving the Overton window to the left. And one of those truly exciting alternatives is postal banking. And it sounds, for folks who've never heard of it before, it sounds like a, wild and new thing. But in fact, most other countries have some form of postal financial services. And we, in fact, had postal banking from the 19-teens to the 1960s here in this country. And there's some folks alive who remember having postal savings accounts. So we at Take on Wall Street were pushing postal banking in partnership with Marissa Baradaran, an academic who studies these things at UC Irvine Law, and with the American Postal Workers Union, who's been working on this for a long time. And so that was where we sat when Louis DeJoy came along last summer. We were looking for ways to be in solidarity when the mail started being sabotaged, and we were nervous about election results and nervous about people's, baby chicks dying in the mail and, prescriptions not being delivered, someone having to go spend $300 at a pharmacy to replace their heart medication because it was, a few days late. We were looking around and we realized that in addition to the really excellent organizing that the postal unions were doing, there needed to be a sort of progressive coalition of organizations that weren't postal experts and just represented a lot of folks who get mail. So anything from the National Farmers Union to Vote Vets to Color of Change to Move On to trying to think of some of the others, rural organizing, public citizen, just a whole bunch of different groups, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, NAACP, just a whole bunch of groups who were incredibly concerned and wanted to do what they could to support postal workers and figure out a way to push back on these slowdowns. And so we organized a call, and we had 475 RSVPs in 24 hours. The coalition was born. We are still very shoestring. It's not a huge outfit. It's certainly not its own organization. It's just very much a kind of a situation room where we're trying to figure out how to make the people's voice heard in the best way that we know how. And so, we gather together. We get petitions signed. We had 2 million petition signatures last year on a petition to reverse the mail slowdowns. Then we organized in partnership with a lot of folks, and especially Move On and the Postal Workers Union, about 1,100 protests at post offices last August. You may remember or have participated in some of those. And fast forwarding to the new administration, we've pushed for filling those empty seats, which happened earlier this year. Put forward some names, pushed for postal banking, pushed for a different vision for the Postal Service that was the opposite of what Louis DeJoy had to offer. So, nothing as presumptuous as a 10-year plan in Washington, my goodness. But, what a post office for the future could look like according to the needs of different communities. And we're very proud of that work.
Well, and that's an important,
awesome.
Yeah, that's amazing. What's also important is realizing how much the post office creates community.
That's right.
In a lot of these smaller towns. And so another question that I had, and I remember some history about this a couple of decades ago again, that the U.S. Postal Service had presented, and we're very proud at presenting that they were going to turn over their fleet to electric and get rid of the gas. And this was, 20 years ago. They were because it is the largest fleet in the country, I believe, of vehicles, and they were proud to do it. And then the Republicans just put a stop to that. And now there are current plans I think in the 10-year plan, they were going to get all new gas-powered vehicles, but now I think there's all electric is in either the infrastructure bill or the Build Back Better bill. So can you tell us anything about what happened 20 years ago when the Republicans did end the plan to electrify their vehicles, and then what's happening today?
You know, I will say that does predate my time working on this issue. Okay. So I don't have a whole lot of context there other than, sort of the big reorganization in 1970 and then fast forward quite a bit. I would say that, when President Biden said he wanted 100% of the federal fleet to be electric vehicles, it's not an especially ambitious goal in this moment, while it may have been 20 years ago. One of the things that happened was that Louis DeJoy and postal leadership went out and were pretty quick at getting themselves a contract that wouldn't do that. That sort of best case scenario would be like 10 or 20% electric vehicles, over time, that sort of thing, which, is a great example of not being with the program of this administration. And the other thing that they did is once they awarded the contract to Oshkosh up in Wisconsin, they, I believe that they knew that this was going to happen, but even if they didn't, Oshkosh then immediately said, we're not going to build these trucks in our unionized facilities up in Wisconsin. We're going to build them in South Carolina, right-to-work state where guess who is from? Louis DeJoy. Mm-hmm. And that sort of thing. It's the kind of thing that could really cost the Democrats, the midterms, that like Wisconsin is a key battleground. And, you take that many jobs out of the state and, send them south to a right-to-work state for no good reason. I mean, their argument was something like, oh, we can't find the proper facilities, and then the facilities they chose in South Carolina was like an abandoned, big box mall, and so of course there are several of those in Wisconsin as there are across the country. So it's specious, but I think that they just sort of are like, well, we don't want to do that. We don't. And I suppose there is an argument to be made that like maybe slightly less than 100% of the force could be electric because of certain really long-haul routes, and so I could sort of understand if they were in the spirit of the thing and it was going to be like almost all of them electric, some allowances could be made there. But no, it was sort of like pilot stage, like maybe a few of them. And keep in mind, this current postal fleet has, it's so old, and I think there have been a lot of stories over time written about how the trucks, catch on fire and are incredibly dangerous and are a hazard to postal workers. But also the fleet is 30 years old, and so, if they buy a bunch of new trucks, they're going to probably keep them for 30 years. So imagine a non-electric fleet in 30 years. It would be a lot more of an anomaly. It's just they've got to be future looking because you don't replace a fleet very often.
Well, I think they just a few months ago they came out with what the gas-powered vehicle would look like, and it looked pretty silly. But then I think in the current legislation that's being passed by the Biden administration has money to turn it all electric. So maybe it was that 30 years ago that they wanted to go all electric. Probably was during Carter's time. You remember he put the solar panels on top of the...
Yeah, that's right, the White House.
Yeah, White House, and then Reagan took them all off, and it might have been about the same time trying to change the post office over, and then the Republicans undid that too.
That's right.
Yep.
I mean, I think that Louis DeJoy was like, you're going to give us an appropriation? Sure. We'll take that money. We'll take those billions, So it did to his credit, kind of turn course. But there was no need, all of this is just, you didn't even need to start in that place. You could have started at a premise of, a unionized workforce making a future-looking vehicle. There's no reason why, your management stance should be, cheaper, worse, non-union, like short-term, like all of those decisions, they're all just bad management.
Well, I worked in the public sector for many years, and I would hear the cry that business can do it better. Business can do it better. And you just spelled out how they don't. And then you add the profit margin to that. I mean, I'm not saying that I think government should do everything. I don't want them to make my cars or my jeans but when it comes to the post office, I think that government can do it better and has. Pettis?
Agreed.
Yeah, I think the whole conversation is more connecting the dots We've talked on this show before about, petrol, being kind of the guiding force, how many people are getting bought out by the money that's given to them for their elections coming from fossil fuel companies. Mm-hmm. And this is just part of that same game. And when you talk about short term, managers think short term, leaders think long term, but there's no incentive. It's not part of the game plan to make any of this work. The game plan is to shift resources, hard-earned resources that come through taxes, to wealthy people, and to undermine anything that is about, bringing livable wages, union jobs. They don't want that. They're breaking unions. So this is all part of a larger narrative. DeJoy is just one of the conduits for this process. At least that's the way, as we talk today, that's the way it comes to my mind. I'm hoping that maybe with the two new board members, who is it, Daniel Tangerlini and Derek Kahn, that maybe we can get some movement in a different direction. Do you know anything about either of those gentlemen and how you feel about what their role might be on the board?
Yeah, we're trying to catch up because a lot of this caught a lot of folks off guard on Friday. We are looking forward to meeting with Tangerlini and figuring out a little bit more of what his role on the board is going to look like. I think that there are some things that we have found about Mr. Khan that have us concerned, including, as you know, my day job is taking on Wall Street, and Mr. Khan has advised Oak Tree Capital, and Oak Tree Capital is a pretty terrible private equity firm that has, you sort of mentioned, fossil fuels. The Oak Tree's role is to kind of buy up, aging plants or fossil fuels investments that others don't want to invest in anymore because they might be divesting, whether it be banks or funds. And, they have been central to eviction actions in Arizona in December and January, right when the state was the sort of global hotspot for COVID. And right when their co-chair purchased a $26 million LA mansion, they've attacked public utilities, actually California PG&E, and they, continue to get pension investments for a whole host of reasons that are maybe more complicated than we go into now. But, it doesn't speak well, certainly for someone who would be the steward of a public service. So we're pretty nervous there, and it also seems a little bit like an own goal. Why on earth would you, as the administration, not just play the card that you have, which is that the only stipulation in the board's bylaws is that not 5 members of it be of the same party. It doesn't say that they have to be, X number of Republicans and X number of Democrats. And so they appointed an independent in Amber McReynolds this spring, which means that they weren't going to get to 5 Democrats regardless, so they could have chosen anybody they wanted to replace John Barker. And instead they, left that decision up to the minority leader and the Republicans. And that to me seems like, gosh, like this would be a moment where you could, make a different choice. Name somebody to it who, for instance, has postal banking experience, since Mr. DeJoy seems intent on bungling his postal banking pilot. Lots of ways you could go there. So it's a little frustrating to see that they made that choice when they absolutely didn't have to.
So what is the board, once those two are appointed, what is the board makeup of Republican, Independent, and Democratic?
So it's going to be, let me take a look here. I think it's like 4, 4, and 1. Obviously, the Postmaster General and the Deputy Postmaster General are on the board and are votes. They are votes for substance, but they are not votes for their own hiring and firing, obviously. Mm-hmm. So it's 9 who are able to hire and fire the Postmaster General. And that's, you've got Robert Duncan, who's McConnell's guy. You've got Roman Martinez, another Republican. You've got Donald Moak, who is a Trump-appointed Democrat, another sort of private equity guy. You've got William Zollers, another Republican. And then from the Biden appointees, you've got Ron Stroman, one of the two folks who quit in protest when DeJoy was hired, has been named to the board and has so far been very serious about his public stewardship role. You've got Anton Hajar, who's a civil rights lawyer and former attorney for the Postal Workers Union. You've got Amber McReynolds, who I mentioned as an independent. And then you've got Mr. Tangherlini coming in. So how everybody will vote, when it comes to a Biden-appointed Republican versus a Trump-appointed Democrat, I don't think is entirely clear yet. This is the board that allowed, themselves to be represented as tickled pink last year. So we don't know where their loyalties all lie. And so it's unclear. I would say that it's probably safe to say that there certainly aren't the outright votes to remove DeJoy at this point.
I want to follow up on that after our break. We're speaking with we're speaking with Porter McConnell with the Save the Post Office Coalition. And you're listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7 FM, Many Voices, One Station. Want a friend to hear this interview? Be Bold America is available as a podcast. Now, you and your friends can listen for free on your favorite podcast platforms, such as Apple, Google, Spotify, Radio Public, and many others. I'm your host, Jill Cody.
Buddhism, Judaism, Baha'i, Islam, Christianity, Hinduism. Sound interesting? Faith Matters is a unique bi-monthly program that explores spirituality, life, and meaning with local religious leaders. We discuss areas of common ground and also identify distinct differences among diverse spiritual perspectives. Join us on the second and fourth Sunday evening of every month from 6 to 7 as we have thought-provoking conversations about Faith Matters on 90.7 KSQD.
Today, our topic is The Post Office is Under Attack. Why does Louis DeJoy want to destroy it? We're speaking with Porter McConnell, co-founder of Save the Post Office Coalition, and she's also the campaign director for Take on Wall Street. Visit takeonwallstreet.com for more information. And to just follow up about DeJoy's role, it was dawning on me as you're explaining the makeup of the board and how things vote, is that it's possible we may not get rid of Louis DeJoy. Mm-hmm. And I think before we go into asking, what you'd suggest listeners keep doing, stop doing, start doing, I want to talk a couple minutes on who Louis DeJoy is and his actually very corrupt behavior. I have a few points here, but I wanted you to get started there because I think people need to know how corrupt he is. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So Louis DeJoy has made a career in much the way that many folks, of his particular background have made a career. However, he's, I would say, really been an exemplar for the treat your workers poorly, do a lot of campaign spending, and, scratch each other's backs with your buddies and your sort of board members and that sort of thing. So He's done a lot of shady stuff. The latest revelations are that within the past year, as they have had their respective roles, Louis DeJoy invested $300,000 in Ron Bloom's asset management firm, Brookfield. And Ron Bloom has in turn invested in XPO Logistics, Louis DeJoy's former firm. Now, he still has ties there that are financial and considerable, into the millions. And then the other thing that happened very recently this summer that, really speaks to the need to strengthen ethics rules at USPS is that USPS recently signed a $120 million contract with XPO Logistics. And DeJoy recused himself and allowed his chief of staff to make that decision, the gentleman who reports to him.
Oh, my.
And that was considered sufficient based on the current ethics rules. So basically, it's like a buddy movie between him and Bloom turned into Nightmare on Elm Street for the rest of us. It's bad. And I sort of mentioned, terrible working conditions at XPO and New Breed, his firm before XPO that became XPO was bought by XPO. There was a straw donor scheme where, the FBI is investigating still. They basically gave his employees, the instructions. So several of them say to reporters, I believe it was the Post who broke the story, to donate to various Republican candidates, and then, mysteriously got the same amount in a bonus, following the donation. And, he said, "How could you think?" It reminds me of that scene in Casablanca. "I'm shocked to think there's gambling here. You're winning, sir." It's like, come on, Occam's razor. It'd be very unlikely if that wasn't the case,
So both Ron Bloom and Louis DeJoy are really walking conflicts of interest because Bloom invests in DeJoy's company and DeJoy invests in Bloom, and Bloom's on the board and DeJoy is the head postmaster. It really is, astounding. It's just astounding how overt they are with all this. Yeah. So what do you think listeners should keep doing, stop doing, and start doing, Porter, to help you and help fight and watch this current new board? I mean, it doesn't sound like it could be possible that we might not get rid of Louis DeJoy. So what can listeners and Pettis and I do?
Yeah. I mean, I think the keep is demanding that Louis DeJoy be fired. Let's not let that go quietly into the night. It's really important to know that the president responds to pressure, the board responds to pressure. They're not used to being advocated toward, by regular folks, and so we need to keep up the pressure there. And then in terms of things to stop, we need to break up with the narrative that the Postal Service is broke. And we've talked about this a little bit, but 80 to 90% of their financial losses are from that pre-funding mandate. There's a bill before Congress that could pass that would make that go away. It doesn't do anything about the past drain. But anyway, whenever Louis DeJoy tells Congress or the rest of us that it's necessary to slow down first-class mail and raise prices because they're suffering all these losses, don't believe them.
No. And also FedEx don't FedEx and UPS use the Postal Service too?
For the last mile. That's right,
yes.
Because they don't find it profitable because, as you say, it's a market failure to deliver to everybody in this country is expensive, and it shouldn't be the way we connect to each other, especially in places that don't have broadband, shouldn't be prohibitively expensive. That's not in anyone's interest. It's not in democracy's interest. So, of course, if there was no service in these places, we know for a fact that FedEx and UPS and DHL wouldn't go there because they're not going there now. So, yes.
Right. They count on the post office to go everywhere to help their business model succeed. Fascinating.
Yeah, that's right. And then in terms of starting, I would like to see us turn the narrative into, and this is already happening, it's been really great to see, a demand that we expand the post office, not contract it. We need to demand a community hub for services. We need longer hours, not shorter hours. We need office services. We need Wi-Fi in the parking lot. A lot of folks have said that would be incredibly helpful.
Oh, that's true. Yes.
Right? And communities where you have to drive to the highest hill nearby in Appalachia to get a cell phone signal, that's ridiculous. We need low-fee ATMs. We need basic checking and savings accounts, somewhere to get your Social Security check, somewhere to sign up. Already they take passport applications, but, let's do more. EBT, Social Security, all of these different services that the government offers. A lot of places where, I live in D.C., and CVS, allows the metro system, the subway system to, you can recharge your card at a CVS. Why on earth can't you do that at a postal service? There's no reason. There's no good reason. So I would like to see us start thinking bigger and stop apologizing for the Postal Service's footprint in our towns and start saying, we love it that there are 31,000 postal services. We love that there are more branches than McDonald's and Starbucks combined, and we think that's exactly where they should be, and we want to see them expand and not shrink.
Well, and you mean to act boldly and to get these things done?
Be bold,
yes,
America.
Be bold, America. Do you
right.
have a list of all those services? You know, Keep is demanding DeJoy still be fired and break the narrative that the Postal Service is broke. It isn't. But then you listed all the things that the post office could do. Do you have that on your website so people could take that information for a postcard or a call to their representative?
Yeah, I'm trying to think the best place basically is to go to the issues part of the navigation bar up top, and then you'll see the Save the Post Office Coalition, and you click on that, and there should be some resources there. And I will happily update them with some very clear marching orders there. But who wouldn't want free Wi-Fi?
Well, exactly. And we heard stories of teenagers having to go to parking lots to do their homework. And if that's still the case, while we're building Wi-Fi out into the rest of the country, like we did once with telephone lines, that it'd be nice if the post office could provide that. So, Pettis, in the next 30 seconds, do you have a wrap-up comment?
This has been a fascinating conversation, one that's gone to some places I didn't think we were going to get to. But is there anything that we didn't cover that you would like to get on the air?
I'm trying to think. I think in general, if we as a country can be a little bit more suspicious when we hear the private sector sell us things.
Yes.
And a little more optimistic about what our government, which is us, can do for us, then I think that we will be in a lot better place. And I know that comes from building trust and faith in each other, and that has certainly taken a dive during COVID times. But I think that we have shown that we can produce things like the stimulus. We can do big things. And I think the more that we expect more from each other, the better off we'll be.
Well, those are great closing comments, Porter. Pettis and I really enjoyed this conversation. I wish we had more time with you. Thank you for being our bold and impressive guest. We appreciate you and all Take on Wall Street and Save the Post Office Coalition is doing. You're doing wonderful work and fighting for every one of us in this country to keep getting their mail.
Without the coalition, for sure.
Well, pass our thank yous on to them.
Will do.
Great, thank you.
Great to talk to you both, Jill and Pettis. Thank you.
Take care.
Up next on Be Bold America, Sunday, December 5th at 5 p.m. will be Policing, Vigilantes, and White Supremacy. Every day we're drifting farther to the political right as a minority of the country uses brute force to undermine the basic tenets of our democracy. It is a win-at-all-cost mentality. Polarities of democracy theory takes opposing perspectives in which one side wins and the other loses and reframes them to create win-win for both perspectives. Dr. William Benet of Walden University will discuss the work of the Institute for Polarities of Democracy and the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. We'll discuss their initiatives to reimagine better policing, the emergence of vigilantism, white supremacy, and how they are impacting policing in the United States. So join us on Sunday, December 5th at 5 p.m. to hear our Policing, Vigilantes, and White Supremacy. Remember, Be Bold America is available as a podcast. Now you may listen to the show anytime for free wherever you get your podcasts. And I want to give a special thank you to Be Bold America's program engineer, Emily Donham, and to our program director, Howard Feldstein. You're listening to KSQ Santa Cruz, many voices, one station. Listen worldwide online on ksqd.org. Stay tuned for Reflections on Buddhism. My name is Jill Cody.
And I'm Dr. Pettis Perry.
And thank you for listening to Be Bold America. Until next time, keep, stop, start.